Welcome to Music Outlook LA, the podcast which highlights the independent artist, whether they are a musician, vocalist, actor, actress, live audio or in-studio engineer, or a videographer, photographer. I'm your host, Will Kimsey. Each episode, we'll look at the gigs of the independent artists, from the venues we play to how we set up and break down, the gear we use and why we use it, and the info we hope you'll find useful as we all make our way in the entertainment industry. Music Outlook LA is brought to you by Kim Z Entertainment LLC. Go to kim-zentertainment.com to find out what they're doing for the independent artists. Kim Z Entertainment LLC. Independent entertainment done independently. Ladies and gentlemen, my guest today is Michael Kollwitz. He is a Chapman stick player. And for those of you that don't know, I guess the layman's term, or description rather, for a Chapman stick would be the melding of a guitar with a bass and a piano. Doesn't have piano keys, but you kind of play it like it. But I'm going to let Michael give a better description than what I just did. But he is a Chapman stick player. Spent pretty much his entire musical career with the instrument. And I had a previous guest, Gene Perry, who also played the stick. And Gene and Michael know each other. And Gene and I, have a connection to Palisades High, and say a shout out and prayers going out to everybody dealing with those fires right now. Like I said, my connection to the school is that I am alumni. So that's pretty much it on that. Got a little tongue-tied there, so forgive me. But we're getting back to the Chapman stick, and like I said, Gene is a friend of Michael's, and Gene gave a good description in his episode of the show. So we're just going to continue on with that description and on that topic of the Chapman stick, its early days and everything else. So without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, this is Michael Kollwitz. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me on the show, and thanks for mentioning Gene. I don't know if he knows it or not, but I'm so proud of him and what he's done with the stick over the years. We met in the early 80s, and we were actually pen pals before there was a thing called email.
Yeah.
So, we go way, way back. The Chapman stick is probably one of the most radical developments in stringed instruments since probably the invention of the electric guitar. It allows the player to use both hands at the same time without having to pick, pluck, strum, or even bow. Just one tap of your finger makes a note on the Chapman stick. They're kind of rare, and seeing someone play it is sort of right up there with spotting a unicorn these days. In his lifetime, Emmett Chapman manufactured a little over 8,000 of these instruments in the basement of his home, both in Laurel Canyon and then later Woodland Hills. And so.
All right. So what initially drew you to this very unique instrument?
It was different. Right out of high school, I got a job in a music store. And I played the trumpet for 10 years in school band, so I was always interested in music. Synthesizers were just becoming commercially available. I was fascinated, but I had absolutely no keyboard skills or training. I played the trumpet. And my other hand just held the thing. And then I saw this tiny little ad in the back of a trade magazine. It said, "Tap softly, but carry a big orchestra." And I was fascinated. It had this little stick guy, the little stick logo. And so I wrote away for information. There was really no email at that time. So you had to write a handwritten thing, lick the envelope, put a stamp on. And the Chapmans were kind enough to send me a rather poorly photocopied article that someone had done on Emmett, and I was just fascinated. A few months later, we met in person at the UC Riverside Barn Coffee House. I went out back with Emmett. He showed me how the instrument worked, and I held it, and I was just like, whoa. And I had just seen him give the most incredible performance. So I was fascinated with the man and the instrument. And I'm sure a lot of your listeners and viewers have been fascinated with either the instrument or Emmett or both over the years.
All right. It is a unique instrument, I will say that. Like I said, I've seen Gene play it. And he's really the only person I've ever seen play it with any semblance of success. I had a roommate in college who picked it up around, this would be 85, but he couldn't get it. He was a bass player, but he just couldn't get it. He still has it unless he sold it to somebody who will love it more than he was able to. He tried. He really tried. Walked up and down the hallways at Berkeley and Boston, had it with him, just trying his hardest, sitting in the practice room, but he just never could get it. But he was a great bass player. I don't know why he couldn't get the two to go together, but James, shout out to you.
I'll pick it back up. You never know.
There it is. There it is. So you did trumpet. I've always been a keyboard player, and my other instrument is clarinet. So I get with the early music lessons and everything. But your Chapman is a unique instrument, and being so unique, I'm sure it presented an early learning challenge by the facial expression you gave when Mr. Chapman was teaching it to you or showing it to you outside there. Gotta love that face.
Oh,
Uh,
thanks.
so, how long did it take you to feel comfortable playing it?
Well, after meeting Chapman, I was presented with the problem of acquiring an instrument, which is probably the biggest challenge for most players. I talked my dad into loaning me the money to go buy a stick, and we're talking $600 in 1976, which probably would have bought 2 or 3 used cars. I drove to Chapman's home and purchased an instrument from him right there in his living room, and he says, "Would you like to take a lesson?" We went upstairs, and that lesson lasted about 2.5, 3 hours. By the time I left there, my head was ready to explode. And I continued lessons with Emmett for many, many years. I lived in Riverside. He lived at the top of Laurel Canyon. So every time I took a lesson, it was pretty much an all-day deal. But I kept with it, and a few years in, Emmett asked me to help demonstrate the instrument with him at a NAMM show. Now, because I was at a music store, I knew what it was, and I was just absolutely terrified at the idea of doing that. But kind of like skydiving, I just did it. I jumped out the door and went to the NAMM show and kind of got over it. But it was just so different at the time. I mean, here I am, a 20-something kid, and you're trying to explain to someone over the phone what a Chapman stick is? Forget it. It was just not happening. But I just I just stuck with it, pardon the pun, and that's the case with, I think, a lot of good stick players. They just stick with it.
That's it. And
People
that
always
is also the title of your book, Stick With It, Adventures of a Chapman Stick Player,
the
available on
best
Amazon.
instrument you've never heard of.
Right, there you go. So I'll be having the link for that book in
Thank
the show credits. And you'll probably see it flashing across the screen, folks, every so often. So I'm in the process of listening to the audio book now, which Michael eloquently begins to tell his story. And I'm going to combine the next question with something out of the audio book. After you would take a lesson, you mentioned that you went to your local Arby's with your notes and everything else and had your sandwich, all that good stuff.
Yep.
So when you got in there, with your exploding head, trying to piece
Yes.
together all the lesson and everything to make it make sense. Did your prior musical experience help you try to make it make sense? The trumpet playing, and I know some theory carried over and everything. Otherwise, you wouldn't have worked in a music store or all the other things you've been doing.
No, it didn't.
Wow.
Anything I learned on the trumpet, with the exception of being able to tell A from a G, it didn't help at all, because the stick was just totally different from, playing a brass instrument where you're going totally different. And it all started after the first lesson. I went down, I believe it was Sunset Boulevard, and I'm getting ready to get on the 10 freeway back to Riverside, and there was an Arby's. That very first lesson, I drove in there as if I was in a trance. And here I have the new instrument next to me, and I walked in there like a robot, and I just sat down writing, and I saved all of those notes from every single lesson. I still have them to this day. But no, trumpet didn't help me at all. So to your listeners, even if you're really good on the guitar, well, don't give up hope. The stick is just a different animal. You just got to spend a little time with it, get comfortable with it, and tap softly and carry a big orchestra.
All right. So I guess the only thing that did help was some of the theory musically.
Yeah, a little bit.
Right.
But the stick was totally different. The trumpet is a monophonic instrument, one note at a time. The stick is like a piano. If you have either the 10 or 12 string version, that's a lot of notes. You can make some huge polychords, which is something you could never do on a trumpet.
Right. Trumpet, you are just one of the many notes in the chord, within the changes, a lot of stab hits, that kind of thing. I did arranging and composing in Berkeley and still do that to this day. So I'm pretty familiar with the trumpet, knowing that it has to be transposed up a whole step from C so that you guys could read it and all that. So on first experiences, first lessons, first notes, firsts. Tell us about your first performance playing on the Chapman stick. And I bet you were nervous because you kind of said you were a little nervous at the NAMM show.
Well, you bet I was.
And just tell us about that first experience, memorable moments, the jitters, the butterflies.
Well, I had never played outside of my home until Emmett asked me specifically to help him at a trade show. And there's no way I could say no. And so I went to the trade show, and if you've ever been to one, there's famous musicians walking around the aisles. Everybody there knows a lot about music. And here I am, this long-haired leaping gnome from Riverside, California, playing the stick. But it helped Emmett in that he could finally take a break. Because at the previous trade shows, he'd be there pretty much all day by himself demonstrating it. And you can imagine how exhausted he was at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And also in the beginning, a lot of people thought, well, only Emmett Chapman can play it. And he wanted to prove that wasn't the case, even though I played it poorly. But I got out there, and I was nervous. I mean, I'm only 22, I think, something like that. And the instrument is still so new that there was a lot of activity at Stick Enterprises trade show booth.
So what kind of activity do you remember going on? And by the way, I'll be going to the NAMM show this year after 5 years or so or whatever. So I will do a video, try and give you a hint of what NAMM is like. Folks, if you haven't gone and you're a musician, go to NAMM. Enough said.
Yeah. Well, as far as activities, Emmett had about a half a dozen of these powered headphones. So you could plug the stick in and hand a stick to a person, and they could sort of fiddle around with it and see if they get a feel for it without making a lot of noise. One of the people, I was a big fan of the group, the Dixie Dregs, and that would be guitarist Steve Morse. All of a sudden, he walks up to the booth, quiet, humble, unassuming, said, "I'd like to try it." And I knew who he was, so I set him up on the thing. And I couldn't tell what he was doing because I couldn't hear it with his headphones on. About 5 minutes later, he quietly, calmly takes the headphones off, hands me the instrument, and goes, "No, I just don't think it's for me." He quietly walks away, and that's that.
Oh, man.
And some people would put the headphones on and go, "Oh, this is the greatest. I love it." But, and the first trade show I ever went to with Emmett was held in the ballroom of the Disneyland Hotel. You may have noticed it's gotten a little bit bigger over the years.
Yeah.
But I'm sure a lot of your listeners and viewers may have been to NAMM shows. Now they're in 10 hotels, the Anaheim Convention Center. You can tell the professionals. They're wearing a $1,000 suit and sneakers.
That's it. That's it.
Because your feet are going to hurt after a while and picking up all that swag. Here I'm a kid and I go home with hundreds of brochures on stuff I'm never going to buy, but it was so much fun. And they would give away things like Anvil gave away a little briefcase, and I thought that was the coolest.
I'm waiting to see what they do this year. It's been about 4 or 5 years since I've gone, and I'm going to try to get there every day for the seminars, the workshops, everything. It's a lot of fun, folks. You can't miss it. Once a year, every January.
I'm sure every single one of your listeners would love to go. And over the years, it got so high tech and high security. I mean, they probably got eyeball scans by now.
I'll let you know. I'll let you know if there's a retinal scan somewhere.
Some of my friends would, make up a business card, Joe's Music, just to get in and say they were, in the industry. But huge trade show. And of course, you got all the East Coast merchants that come that would love to get their families out of the snow to spend the day at Disneyland while they do business and buy inventory for the coming year.
It's great experience. A great experience, folks. So as you have gotten further along into your career, the butterflies are slowly disappearing, the jitters are de-jittering, and you're beginning to carve out a successful career with the stick. So how did you develop your signature playing style and the musical genres that you explore? I will again put in the show notes where you can hear this man. Damn good.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, I just stuck with it for the first 20 years or so. I was a husband, father, mortgages, car payments. I had a job in the two-way radio industry.
Okay.
So I sold two-way radio systems, antennas, equipment, and I played the stick on the side. I usually did, 2, 3, 4 gigs a month. But that all changed in 2003. And over the years, I grew up listening to 1970s classic rock. So those were most of my influences. But I found that I liked a little bit of everything. I mean, I could listen to a Frank Zappa record. Next, I'd listen to Whitney Houston. Next, it would be Emerson, Lake and Palmer. I just loved it all, everything except for maybe opera because, I don't speak Italian, didn't know what the fat lady was saying. But I listened to just about everything. I spent 6 years in Hawaii. I lived in Lahaina, Maui. And that was a big turning point for me because I started playing with a lot of Hawaiian musicians, and they just sort of have a different vibe.
Right.
And I started assimilating kind of that slack key feel, and it just sort of gets in your bones, and it started coming out in my music. Every other weekend for 6 years, I played under the banyan tree in Lahaina, and I had the honor of meeting people like Carlos Santana, Mick Fleetwood, and they all encouraged me. They thought the stick was great, and what it did was it gave me more encouragement and impetus, and sort of set my path. Um, as far as developing a playing style, it was just from many years of playing cover music, and then one day you just go, I'm tired of this, and you start making your own original compositions.
So speaking of original, I'm sure that like the guitar, there is certain tunings for the strings. Um, have you ever experimented with any different techniques or alternate tunings?
Yeah, many times. There are, I call them the clever tunings because they really are clever, and there's probably a dozen different ones. I've probably used 4 or 5 different ones over the years, but I always seem to find myself going back to Emmett Chapman's original tuning. And for the benefit of your listeners, the melody or guitar range strings would be tuned in perfect fourths going down, which is
Mhm.
just like a guitar with the exception of that bastard second string. So all fourths, and then in the bass side of the instrument, the bass strings are going up or ascending.
Mhm.
Emmett wanted the lowest root note to be in the middle of the instrument so he wouldn't have to grab too far. He could just go and get it.
Yeah.
And those notes are tuned in fifths, like violins, violas, cellos. Perfect fifths and perfect fourths are exact mirror opposites of one another. It sounds crazy, but once you get used to the classic tuning, it was brilliant. Just like everything else Emmett did, just brilliant.
Wow. That's somebody I definitely would have liked to have met. I definitely would have. Sounds like he was a very interesting man. Um, and you knew him for a while, huh?
Yeah, I was one of his first students. In the beginning, everyone's thinking only Chapman can play the stick. Not true. In the beginning, when I first met him in '76, he was giving lessons to a number of people because he wanted others to be able to play his instrument. As the years went on, Emmett wasn't able to give lessons because he was more focused on the manufacturing and the continual refinement of his instruments. Um, so he didn't give many lessons later. When I started with him uh, over 48 years ago, there was no book. Emmett was writing his very first book freehands, and at every lesson, he'd give me a few more photocopied pages of the typewritten notes for each lesson. So I was putting it together before it was even published. But there's a lot of resources now, and I know a lot of your listeners are probably saying, oh, that stick, it's just too weird. I don't know. But who would teach me? There's a lot of resources. A number of players have done excellent videos how to play the stick. There's at least a half a dozen different books. Again, I said the hardest part about playing the stick is just finding one. But
Okay.
once you do, hey, just put in some time. People will ask me, well, how long does it take to learn the stick? Well, it's just like anything. When you
Mm-hmm.
learned how to drive, you were so careful about everything, make sure, and now you do it almost unconsciously. It's like learning any new skill. You just got to take some time. If you're going to pick it up once a week for 20 minutes, it's going to
Mm-hmm.
take a long time. But if you pick it up once a day, 20 minutes for a year, you're going to do just fine. And
Yeah, you go
what I
from
had to do
driving.
was I had to practice one hand at a time to
Yeah.
finally bring them together because I was used to doing this on a trumpet.
Mm-hmm. You go from hands at 10 and 2, sitting up straight to this.
There you go. Yeah. And
that
pretty
that
soon, how did you get home? Oh, I drove on autopilot. Well, it's
that
just like anything else. Get a stick and pick up the stick and put down the pick. Something like that. There was one. Oh no, Emmett. I bought him a little license plate frame, years ago, it said, pick up the stick and throw away the pick.
Okay, there you go. There you go. Pick up the stick and throw away the pick.
Yeah.
I love it. I love
I've
it.
saved a fortune on picks, believe me.
Good, good. Wow. When it comes to the music and the stick, um, written any music just for the stick, or what songs have you composed on it or performed that might be your favorites?
I've put out a lot of original material. And as far as my personal favorites, I did this one compilation album. It's called Chapman Stick in Hawaii. And
Mm-hmm.
the album included 18 originals that I wrote and recorded while I lived in Lahaina. And there's 3 songs on there that are dear to my heart. One is Ho'okipa Point, which is a place off of Maui where windsurfers' mecca of the world.
Mm.
Another one is called the Front Street Stroll, which referred to Lahaina, which there is no more Front Street. And the other one was called Walo Morning. I lived on the east side of Maui for about a year off the road to Hana. Talk about quiet. It was spooky at night. But yeah, those are some of my personal favorites. I did a series of 3 albums here in Sedona, Serenity 1, 2, and 3. And it was all peaceful music on the stick, and it's all originals. There's probably at least 50 just on those 3 albums.
Yeah. When you mentioned, forgive the pun, the stick-to-itiveness of sticking with the stick, and as far as learning how to play it and so forth. Okay, Siri, you really need to stop. You really do. I was getting to you mentioning one hand at a time. For me, it was the organ. Now, I could play 2 keyboards simultaneously, left hand playing chords, right hand playing melody or soloing, and, I've got this going on. But what hung me up were the feet. And one of the things that happened with me was at Berkeley, I was playing basketball outdoors instead of on a regulation 10-foot, on an 8-foot court. And I used to be able to jump pretty high for a guy who's 5.5 feet tall. Those days are way gone. And even if I didn't land wrong on my foot, it just made a perfect right angle with the ground. My ankle's never been able to be the same. And let's just say I could tell you when it's going to rain. And I was coming down off of a dunk, but even before that, and since then, I've never been able to get my feet to do it. Was that final coordination. And unfortunately, I never really stuck with it. So I can say, don't be like me, you guys, stick to it. Although I realize I'm not an organ player, I'm a keyboard player and I'm a piano player. I will leave the organ to somebody else who could do it. But I have tried it. But the feet it hung me up. But I'm sure if I took several years at it, I would have to have an organ in my house. And there's just no way and nowhere I could get one in here, even if it was a small Hammond B3. So it reminded me of that. And I just wanted to share that with the listeners. So for someone interested in learning about the stick, what advice would you be able to give them to overcome their initial challenges, which is what we've been talking about just now?
Number 1, most important thing, acquire an instrument. That's about the hardest thing. Once you've got one, get Emmett's Free Hands book. It has stood the test of time. There's been quite a few other books by other players, and there's some very, very good ones. But there's a lot of resources to learn how to play. Stick Enterprises in Woodland Hills also keeps a list of instructors basically all over the world. So you might contact them and find out if there's someone near you. There are several players that give lessons via Zoom, so you can have a one-on-one even though you may not be geographically close. So there's a lot of resources, and the main thing is just plug it in and give it a try. One of the beauties of the stick is there's so many ways you can go with it. Even after 50 years, there's so many things that haven't been done. The stick is electric, and it has two outputs, bass and melody. So you could put it to 2 amps. You could put it right into a PA system, a recording board. You can use virtually any effect ever created for electric instruments, anything for bass, guitar, keyboards. And then in the early 90s, Emmett worked with Roland and developed a MIDI pickup that allows you to use the stick as a controller, which is amazing. I never wanted to take the place of a keyboard player, so I didn't focus on organs and pianos. But imagine being able to mix into your stick sound, any number of, synthesized backgrounds, and you can do it all in real time, which was amazing. I purchased the very first, the GR1 synthesizer, and this was back in the early 90s, and I bought one of Emmett's instruments with the MIDI pickup on it, and it really opens a lot more creative potential than you can use just controlling it with the stick. On synthesizers, the keyboard is basically a controller that controls the synthesizer. People have used all kinds of other things like ribbon controllers. And then, so just look at the stick as a way to control a synthesizer and make your sound even bigger.
Right. You are definitely speaking my language. I'm pretty much mind blown here at this point. I didn't know that you could actually MIDI a stick to some keys and use the stick as a controller. Learn something new every day.
Here, I'll show you one.
Okay.
Let's see here. It's probably not going to come out well. No. Let's see here. I got to turn that blurry thing off. Oh, I'm sorry. It's not working too well.
There we go.
There you go.
Right there.
You can see it under the 6 melody strings, and the black goodie on top is one of the Roland. I'm sorry about the blurry thing. I should have turned it off. But yeah, it just goes right under the melody strings. You could literally put it on both sides, put one on both sides, but the stick bass just doesn't seem to trigger quite as well as the melody strings. So I never went that direction. But it allows you to get a stereo output from the synthesizer in addition to the stereo output of the stick. So it's just one of a number of different things you can use your stick skills to, kind of expand your horizons.
Right. So let's talk about your book. And I'm going to put also in the notes as well the Emmett's book. You said it was the free hands book?
Yeah. When Emmett first started playing his guitar with both hands, he called it free hands. So here's a musician that comes up with a new technique and literally invented an instrument to accommodate his new technique. I think that's amazing, really. And one of the things about Emmett was he was a problem solver. continual. It wasn't just something you did, every now and then. He was solving problems every day in new and different ways that um, I'm sure he's going to be remembered for many years for the way he looked at things and always came up with a new solution.
Okay. All right. I like coming up with new solutions. Kind of makes you feel special when you've stared at something for hours, if not days, and the light bulb comes on and you're like, either you're elated or you're like, why didn't I think of that sooner?
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
usually the latter for me, but
Yeah, for
it's
most
you
people, and I'm sure your listeners too go, duh.
exactly. Uh, duh. So on your book, um, Stick With It: Adventures of a Chapman Stick Player, and what is it you like to call it? The instruments nobody has ever heard of.
The best musical instrument you've never heard of.
The best musical instrument you've never heard of. Um, it connects your musical journey with a lot of problem solving skills, um, which we were just talking about, Emmett being the problem solver. So, if you could talk about that connection, problem solving, musical journey.
Well, problem solving is the basis for any kind of progress. I'm sure your musician listeners know what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, how do I get that gig? How do I get all this equipment over there? How do I make it smaller? How do I do this? How do I do that? What songs do I play? You're always solving problems continually. And this is something that I watched Emmett do over the years, and I was always thinking, oh, I want to be more like him. And over the years, you find yourself actually acquiring, some of those skills just by seeing it done all the time. You go, wait a second, there's another way to think of this. What if I could do this? What if I could do that? And that's what Emmett did all the time. The stick was an answer to all these what ifs. Well, what if I could play with both hands? Um, so in my book, what I'm doing is I wanted to document the early years of the stick from my perspective as a student of a brand new instrument. And kind of what happened is over the years, you find you're always solving problems. When I decided to start playing in public, well, one of the first problems was how do you explain to people what this thing is? You couldn't do it over the phone. Um, then, when I left the two-way radio industry in 2003, my problem was, well, how am I going to make a living playing this crazy instrument? And it was just one problem after another, and you just solve one, a new one pops up, a new one pops up, and it's just a continual thing. And the more you're conscious of it, the more you find yourself stretching your brain, going, maybe this crazy thing over here on the fringe just might work. So why not try it?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what I found. And it was, by osmosis from Emmett. And then, throughout my career, it was always a new problem. How are you going to do this? How are you going to do that? And that is what pretty much the basis of all independent musicians. The whole idea of, oh, I'm going to become a great musician and get signed on a label. Well, we've all know that ended a long, long time ago. And so the stick is the perfect example of it. Emmett never sold out to the big manufacturers because he wanted it done right. And he knew that if he sold out to the Fenders, Gibsons, whatever, his instrument's going to probably be made by robots in Taiwan. It's not going to really play well. So, it was kind of a blessing and a curse all at the same time. Emmett had to set up each and every instrument. So every instrument presented a new problem he had to solve, and it was just like a assembly line of problems, and just solve them one after another. And yeah, that's
Yeah.
enough
Um,
said. Back
So,
to you, Captain. Back to you, so I
yeah.
don't ramble.
Oh, that's okay. You can ramble on. That's what we're here for. Gigs, gear, and info, and all of it is quite useful, Michael. Um, so a couple of things that just gets me thinking about. First thought is that the only guitar player that actually comes to mind, two of them, um, and as you have demonstrated, the stick is played in this kind of a fashion. The instrument goes up in this way here, frets are here, and so forth, and you tap it like you said, like keys on a piano and so forth. So you're got the full sound. Um, Guitarist Stanley Jordan, he would put the guitar on his lap, and he did similar. He didn't use a pick, and he tapped the fretboard when he played. And I just thought that was very innovative. I mean, as you know, back in the day when Jimi Hendrix took a regular right handed guitar and turned it upside down so he could play lefty, we all thought that, whoa, that's genius. Now I know left handed guitar players who take a right handed guitar and turn it upside down. Not to model after Hendrix, but the ones I've talked to have said that if they use a left handed guitar or one that's made for a lefty, it just doesn't have the same feel.
Hmm.
So they prefer to take a guitar, just turn it upside down, take the strings out, and restring it um, as if it was made for them. So I just wanted to mention that. I think the second one was it Jeff Beck, the other guitar player? I think uh, I might be mixing up my guitar players, but he was blind, and he was the guitarist in the band in Patrick Swayze's what was that, Roadhouse.
Oh, okay.
And he did it out of necessity. He played it the same way as well. He put it on his lap, um, and held the chords down in this manner and strummed. So he did it out of necessity. And it just brought those two guitar players to mind. And I didn't give you this question, but you can answer it simply because it's technical problem solving. When you go for your gigs, um, do you pack light? And is the amp a two input amplifier so that you could put the bass in one channel and the treble in another? Do you run it through a PA? I know it depends on what the gig is, if there's a sound person or not, but if it's just you, how do you do it?
I used to. I got double hernias from carrying around gear in the '90s, and I mean, I had so many amps, and I thought it was so cool. Oh, I got this big this that, and over the years, you go, there's got to be a better way. I travel
Mm-hmm.
super, super light. I don't even use effects at gigs anymore. I've got a big, gigantic bucket of effect pedals in the closet. I'll pull them out when I'm recording,
Mm-hmm.
but all I use is just a Fishman. What the hell is it called? Artist Loud Box, and it has two channels on it. The stick sounds just great in one amp, but I've got a pair of these, so if I wanted to, you know, put both sides and play in stereo, you can do that too. But yeah, that's all it takes is any amp with two inputs. And even if you had an amp with only one input, you could get an adapter cable that would take the stereo inputs and mono. So just about any amp you want. I used for my, I guess about 15 years of doing festivals, I used the Crate Limo amps. They're battery powered. I had a pair of those, and that way I could literally play anywhere. I mean, I've done weddings on, beaches in Hawaii, the
Mm-hmm.
mountains in Tahoe, here in the Red Rocks of Sedona. But yeah, I like simple, simple.
I'm a keyboard player, so I can't be too simple.
I know you can. I feel bad for you guys and drummers. And then you see that person come to a gig and they pull out a harmonica out of their pocket. And say, I'm jealous.
Well, that's what Gene's brother does.
Oh, harmonica?
Uh-huh. Except also he picked up the bongos and the congas. So he's got those sitting next to him.
I did not know that. It just coincidentally, Emmett's brother, Dan, also
Mhm.
played the harmonica, and they did a number of recordings together back in the day on Emmett's one and only album entitled Parallel Galaxy.
I'll have to listen to that. I'll have to
Yeah.
check that out. I got to play with Gene a couple of times, a few times actually, between the two bands. And it was like I said, his brother. I'm playing in his brother's band, and Goat Rodeo.
Goat Rodeo.
Yeah,
Okay.
and the first time I played with Gene, he had guitar, and then with the different songs that we were doing, because we're a cover band, um, he would either jump over to the bass, and the bass player would jump to the guitar, because he actually is a guitar player who picked up bass. So there's that. So we have all of that going. So depending on I wouldn't say the intricacy of the bass line, because he can cover it. Either one of them, our bass player Eric can cover them as well. Um, but just what the instrumentation that was required for the song. But Gene went from bass to a guitar. Then he picked up a ukulele for one song. And I'm like, okay, you're kind of a savant here. But he didn't break out the stick. I don't think he needed to.
Oh,
And wait a
well.
minute. Or did he? I have to go back and look at the video, but he had at least those three there. And some of the songs that we do, if we need the acoustic and the electric guitar, that leaves me to do the bass. So I just split the keyboard and have a bass patch in my left hand and piano, organ in the right, as well as the keyboard on the top. So everything is always covered. But I did have to slim down mine when I'm not doing live sound as well as playing. um, I got a lighter amp. I went from a PV 100, which is a very heavy, tall amplifier, and put it down to a Behringer. So I got rid of about 15, 20 pounds, which is quite helpful. And I just make sure that it's just me, my one box with all the cables that I need and a few extras, my two boards, and an amp, and that's it. However, I will take a case of, since I'm the Boy Scout, I'll always have the case of extra quarter inches and XLR cables, extra mics, and all that. So, you know,
Boy Scout
understand.
motto, be prepared.
That's it. That's it. I'm always prepared. Um, you never know. With us musicians, something might happen. You know, cables are always dying at an
Okay.
inappropriate moment.
Same thing with effect pedals.
Hmm.
Oh boy.
They just go out and go out.
Well,
Um,
what it takes to make your sound. And, I'm sure your listeners have all, like all of us, have had to cart around enormous amounts of gear, and you start trimming it down until you can do your sound without it.
hmm
Or
And
less is more. I think Gene always said that.
yeah, less is more, and you learn to do it with smaller stuff. And it's not just as you get older and your body starts to break down and you're like, I can't carry this big thing anymore. You realize you just don't want to lug all that stuff with you. I've got a T-shirt and definition of a musician: someone who loads $5,000 worth of gear into a $1,000 car to drive 100 miles for a $50 gig.
Yeah, I've heard that before, and unfortunately, it's true in many cases, and I'm sure that was me.
Yeah, so if we're going to do all of that because we love it, why not trim down and use as little equipment as possible, so that way you save your body and everything else, and you can get the same dynamic sound with less equipment. I just feel, and as time's going to go on, I know I'm going to scale down even more and more. I love it when I don't have to do sound or anything, and there's a PA system already there, and I can just plug right into the board and go. That's one less piece that I have to take with me. So looking back on your career with the gigs that you've had and that are upcoming, are there any specific performances that stand out to you? And if so, why do those stand out for you?
Oh my goodness. I've, I've, I've done some crazy stuff. When I was in Hawaii, um, I had a production company. I lived on Maui,
Mm-hmm.
and they wanted me to come to Oahu and play at the grand reopening of the Sheraton Waikiki, which had just had a gigantic infinite, what do they call the infinity pool, and everything
Yeah.
was just amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And they wanted me to put me outside on the wall overlooking the event, and they wanted me to sign a waiver. I wouldn't sign it, but they hired me anyway. And so they set me up with a PA system on a ledge overlooking. Uh, it was just wild. They had dancers, uh, special little pools. And so I'm up there playing the stick, and all of the people are below me. They invited executives from properties worldwide to say, "Oh, here's the new Waikiki Sheraton," and that one was just really bizarre, but it
Mm.
was a blast. And I have pictures to prove it. I did another one in the '90s in the Phoenix area at the Wigwam Resort. It was a corporate event for Johnson and Johnson, and it was the motif was "We are living in the future," something like that. And they dressed me up like an alien conehead, and they built a UFO onto a golf cart. And I look like Zeldar the Conehead, and they did my makeup. They made my face silver, and they billed me as the alien guitarist.
Oh my
Got pictures
gosh.
on that one too, man. It was wild. And so I had a guy who drove the golf cart, and we just slowly drove around the event. And I'm standing up, and in all my coneheadedness, and and I do remember after the gig, it took about an hour just to get the damn makeup off, but it was pretty crazy.
Oh my gosh. But the question really is, did you have mass quantities of anything?
Yes, mass quantities of massive consumption.
Yes, you must
Yes.
have that.
Pen was ink delivery mechanism.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, back in the day. Anyway, it was fun. I had a lot of others crazy stuff like that, and I've saved pictures from everything I could because I look back on it years later and go, that was fun. And I'm sure your listeners have even better stories than that. I mean, some of the sometimes the worst gig you ever had. I read uh, uh, from Music Connection magazine in LA. I'm still a subscriber, and they
Hmm.
sometimes have the worst gig you ever had. And I just have so much fun reading those because it reminds me of all of us have those kind of gigs.
We do. We do. We have them, or we've heard of a friend that has had them. Um, so if you could collaborate with anybody, whether they're here with us or not, on your Chapman stick, who would it be with and why that person or persons?
Oh, easy. I'd like to accompany Kenny G on saxophone and then ask Carlos Santana to come in and lay down a guitar solo.
Mind blown.
Yeah, I think that would be I'd be just happy to be the accompanist for either of those. I think it would be fantastic.
I get it.
I know a lot of jazz purists, they hate Kenny G, mostly because he's been successful. But,
yeah.
You know, I mean, that guy's really got a tone. I think he's one of the biggest selling instrumentalists in the history of recorded music. And what a sound. I think it would meld perfectly with the stick.
Yeah. I'm amazed with his circular breathing technique, how he can just carry that note on and you never hear him take a breath in. I've never been able to do it, but I know how the concept of circular breathing works. It's kind of like simultaneously, and I know I'm not saying it right, but you're inhaling through your nose and exhaling out of your mouth almost at the same time. And that's how he's able to carry his notes as long as he's able to carry them. I think, what is it? The signature song was Freebird, I think was the title of it. And toward the end, he just holds this note forever. And I've always been amazed with his ability to be able to hold those notes for the long amount of time that he's able to. And going to get to the last question, then I want you to just, you've got the stick there and just give us a little sample. But you mentioned some of the music you listen to, Emerson, Lake and Palmer. What else is in your car when you're out and about?
Well, in my car, I don't have a big stereo. You know, I drive an old car like most musicians. And so I just listen to the local classic rock stations. Every now and then I'll turn on talk radio, and as soon as they get annoying, I go back. If I get stuck in traffic, which doesn't happen much up here, I live in a rural area, but if I go down to the Phoenix area, get stuck in traffic, I'll just turn on classical music, calms me down.
All right.
Okay, now I'll play the stick. I just don't know how. I got an amp down here. I don't know how it's going to sound on your end, but we'll give it a try.
All right, just ladies and gentlemen, Michael Kollwitz on the stick.
Okay. Oh, here we go. Oh. If you don't mind, I'm going to go up here and see if I can turn off this blurry background. Blurry video. Always show audio. Oh my goodness. I'm sorry, I just don't know how to do it here.
Oh, look for the video icon on the bottom.
Video icon. Oh, here on the bottom.
Yeah, little camera.
Mm-hmm. Oh, there it is.
Arrow.
Blur my back. Oh, there we go. Oh, okay, great. Thanks.
Now you can show us that MIDI pickup.
Oh, sure. The MIDI pickup here is a Roland
right.
GK3. And I don't have it plugged in
right
now. It uses a bizarre 13-pin cable, which are finicky. And then here's the actual pickup here.
Okay.
And then this instrument that I'm playing was made custom for me by Emmett back in 2018. He signed it for me.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. There you go.
It's made out of bamboo. And I had an inlay artist in Marin County do these inlays for me. Emmett could do inlays, but they took too long, so he wanted to focus more on the instrument. I sent the blank out to Larry Larry Robertson, I think his name was.
Mm-hmm.
And I sent it to him, and then Emmett finished the instrument.
So,
Can you hear it?
I can. Sounds
okay.
Beautiful. That is beautiful, man. I rarely use that word beautiful, but that was beautiful, man. That really was.
All wound up in these things.
Oh, that's all right.
There we go.
There you go. Just get detangled. Get detangled. And
Well,
they're
I'm all
still
right.
all handmade, huh?
Yes. Emmett's daughter, Grace, worked with him for decades in his shop, and she knows everything just about that Emmett knew about the instruments. She took over the business when Emmett sadly passed on November 1st of 2021. And it was tough in the beginning because we had just gone through the COVID, and the supply chains for everything just slowed down or shut down. So it was really difficult getting it up and going. But they're producing instruments now, and you can find all of the offerings at stick.com.
Okay. Stick.com, ladies and gentlemen. Tell them that Michael Kollwitz sent you.
Yeah, there's a number of different models. There's a short one called the stick guitar. It's about 10 inches shorter than this in a higher register. There's the stick bass with 8 strings on it. There's the NS stick, which Emmett developed in conjunction with Neil Steinberger.
All right.
Steinberger. Yeah, I hope I got his name right.
Right.
But you know those crazy Steinberg basses? They made an instrument, and there's also 10-string versions, 12-string versions.
And yours is a 12, models. It looks like, right?
Yeah, this is Emmett called it the Grand Stick.
Okay. All right. Stick.com, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah.
That's where you can go. Because you did mention that the most difficult thing, or at least the most difficult with the stick, is obtaining one. So yeah. Nowadays,
I wish I could change that, but I don't know what to do. They're out there. They're out there. If when you see them come up for sale used, it's not very many of them, and just grab it. Just grab it.
All right, ladies and gentlemen. This is my guest, Michael Kollwitz. Michael, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Will. I hope we didn't bore you guys too much.
Oh, no, you didn't bore us too much at all. Not at all. And like I said, that's going to do it for this latest episode, latest episode of Music Outlook LA, Gigs, Gear, and Info. And again, Michael Kollwitz, my guest, thank you so much, sir. Thank you for being a guest on the show. And be sure to check out the show notes, where I'm going to have information about the stick and Michael in there. And please don't forget to like, share, subscribe to the show. It's on Spreaker.com, and it's also on YouTube, which is where you'll see this. Spreaker is audio only. And you can go to just about anywhere you have your podcast: Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Google Play, SoundCloud, Spotify. You can even look us up on the podcast search engine, Listen Notes. And take the time, please, go to podchaser.com and give the show a good rating. Appreciate it. My name is Will Kimsey, a.k.a. WK Music. Peace. This podcast is both brought to you and produced by Kim Z Entertainment LLC. Music Outlook LA is a copyrighted broadcast of Kim Z Entertainment LLC. The views and opinions expressed on this show are not necessarily those of Will Kimsey or Kim Z Entertainment LLC. Any rebroadcast, reproduction, or any other use of this product without the express written consent of Kim Z Entertainment LLC is strictly prohibited.